A deaf boy is adopted by a millionaire, and what the new nanny did is shocking. The cold bit into the skin that Saturday morning in Aspen, Colorado. A dense fog enveloped the tree-lined streets of the upscale neighborhood, where imposing mansions rose among century-old firs like guardians of well-kept secrets. Detective Miller adjusted the collar of his coat as he drove the patrol car down Hydrangea Avenue, with Thor sitting beside him, alert as always. The German shepherd had a way of observing everything, as if he could see beyond what human eyes perceived. Miller knew every curve of that mountain town. He had arrived 5 years earlier, transferred from the capital after an operation. That had cost him more than he cared to remember. Aspen, Colorado seemed like the perfect place for an early retirement from the intensity he had lived. Here, the most serious cases involved drunk tourists and disputes over fences between wealthy neighbors. Nothing that would keep him awake at night, or so he thought. Thor began to sniff the air more intensely as they passed number 423. The European-style mansion stood out even among the other luxurious properties in the area. Its black wrought-iron gates contrasted with the impeccably manicured gardens, white roses aligned with military precision, swan-shaped topiaries, everything calculated, everything perfect, all too artificial for Miller's taste. The dog stopped abruptly, his ears pricked up, and a low, almost inaudible growl escaped his throat. Miller knew that sign. Thor was no ordinary dog. He had been trained in the country's best police dog academies, specializing in search and rescue. More than that, the animal had an instinct that bordered on the supernatural. He had found people buried under rubble, children lost in forests, and once even detected the beginning of a fire before any smoke became visible. "What are you sensing, partner?" Miller stroked the dog's head, trying to calm him. But Thor remained tense, his eyes fixed on the iron gate. There was no movement. The window curtains were closed. No car in the visible garage. Everything seemed in order, but something bothered the animal. After a few minutes, Miller started the car again and continued down the street. He made a mental note of the address and continued his routine patrol. But Thor's unease remained etched in his mind, like a splinter he couldn't remove. Inside the mansion, Clara sat in the corner of the room, clutching her doll with the missing arm. The place she called a room had been an attic before her arrival. The walls were yellowed white with age, with damp stains forming patterns she spent hours observing, trying to find familiar shapes: a heart, a cloud, the face of the mother she barely remembered. The window, too high to reach, let in only a sliver of light during the day. Clara had learned to measure time by that faint light. When the sunbeam touched the left wall, it was morning. When it hit the center, noon. When it disappeared completely, she knew night had fallen, and with it came the deepest silence. Her stomach rumbled. She couldn't remember when she had last eaten, perhaps the night before. Or had it been 2 days ago? Meals were irregular, depending on Lorena's mood and how many visitors were in the house. When she had guests, her stepmother would come upstairs with a tray, always with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Eat quickly and don't make a sound," she would say in a sweet tone that didn't match the coldness of her gaze. "We have important people downstairs, and you know how bad it is when I have to." Come up multiple times. Clara always obeyed. She had learned early that questioning or crying only made things worse. In the first few months after Lorena's arrival, she still tried to call for her father, to beg for attention, to ask to go downstairs and play in the garden, as she did when her mother was still there. But her father never listened, or pretended not to listen. He was always too busy with business, traveling to New York City, Los Angeles, sometimes even out of the country. "You need to understand, Clara," he would say on the rare occasions he came up to see her. "Lorena is doing her best for you. She knows what's right. You're a difficult girl, always have been. Your mother spoiled you too much, and now we're correcting that." Spoiled too much. The words echoed in the girl's head. She didn't understand what it meant to have been spoiled. She only remembered her mother's warm lap, the bedtime stories, the walks in the garden where they could pick strawberries together. Was that wrong? Did she deserve to be there, in that cold, dark room, because she had been spoiled? The sound of high heels echoed in the hallway. Clara curled up further into the corner, clutching the doll tightly. The footsteps stopped outside the door. A key turned in the lock. Lorena entered, elegant as always, wearing a beige wool set and pearls around her neck. Her French lavender perfume filled the room, sickly sweet and suffocating. "Good morning, Clara. I hope you slept well." The voice was soft, almost maternal, but the eyes told another story. Eyes that evaluated, judged, sentenced. "I brought your breakfast. It's nothing grand, but a child like you needs to learn to be grateful for what she receives." She placed a tray on the floor, a piece of dry bread, a glass of water. Clara looked at the food without daring to touch it while Lorena was there. "What's wrong? Aren't you going to say thank you?" Her stepmother tilted her head, waiting. "Thank you," Clara whispered, her voice hoarse from so much silence. "Very good. See how easy it is to be polite." Lorena smiled, smoothing her dress. "Today, I'm going out for lunch with my club friends. You'll stay here quietly, as always. If I hear any noise, anything that makes me embarrassed when I get back, you know what happens." Clara knew. She knew very well. She nodded, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Excellent." Lorena turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "Oh, and about your father. He's traveling again tomorrow. No point in waiting for him. You're not his priority, dear. Never were." The door closed. The key turned again. The footsteps receded down the corridor, descending the wooden staircase that Clara only knew from afar. She waited until she was sure she was alone before crawling to the tray. She ate the bread slowly, chewing deliberately to make it last. She drank half the water, saving the rest for later. She didn't know when she would eat again. Outside, the sun remained hidden behind low clouds, and Aspen, Colorado continued its routine as a charming, quiet town where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. 3 days had passed since Thor's first reaction in front of the mansion. Miller couldn't get it out of his head. There was something about that house that bothered not only the dog, but now him too. As an experienced officer, he had learned to trust his instincts as much as he trusted concrete evidence. And his instinct screamed that something was wrong. On Tuesday morning, he decided to pass by Hydrangea Avenue again. This time he wasn't on official patrol, just walking Thor before work. The neighborhood was slowly waking up, with housekeepers opening gates, gardeners trimming hedges, drivers washing imported cars, the quiet life of the mountain elite. As they approached number 423, Thor reacted immediately. The dog pulled hard on his leash, practically dragging Miller to the back fence of the property. There, away from the eyes of the main street, the garden was less maintained. The plants grew wilder, and the fence had spots where rust showed the age of the place. Thor sniffed the ground intensely, moving back and forth with urgency. Suddenly, he stopped. He began to dig with his paws, throwing dirt backward. Miller knelt down and saw what had caught the animal's attention: a torn piece of blue fabric, dirty with earth and dampness. He picked it up carefully, examining it in the morning light. It looked like it was from a child's shirt, perhaps pajamas. The threads were worn, as if the fabric had been forcefully ripped. He put the piece of cloth in his pocket and patted Thor. "Good job, partner. But what does this mean?" The dog looked at him with those intelligent eyes, as if wanting to say much more than he could. Then he turned again to the mansion, focusing especially on the upstairs windows. One of them, smaller than the others, always had its curtains closed. Miller watched for a few minutes but saw no movement. That's when a voice surprised him from behind. "Looking for something, detective?" Miller turned and found an elderly lady with white hair tied in an elegant bun. She wore a pink wool coat and carried a wicker basket. She must have been 70, maybe more, but her eyes were bright and alert. "Mrs. Eleanor, good morning. I was just walking Thor before work." The woman smiled, but there was something calculated in that smile. Eleanor Davies was known in the neighborhood as the widow who knew everything about everyone. She had lived there for 40 years and prided herself on knowing every family, every secret, every piece of gossip that circulated within the high walls of the mansions. "What a coincidence," she said, approaching. "I was coming back from the bakery and saw you standing here. Interested in the Sterling house?" Sterling. He finally had a name. Not especially. Thor was just sniffing around here. Oh yes, dogs have an incredible sense of smell, don't they? The lady looked at the mansion with an expression difficult to decipher. You know, it's funny you mention that. I myself have noticed strange things lately. What kind of things? Miller tried to keep his tone casual, but his attention was completely focused. Eleanor came closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a precious secret. The little girl, Clara. I used to see her playing in the front garden about 2 years ago. Quiet, you know. One of those children who don't make noise. I always thought she seemed a little sad, but I figured it was just shyness. Her mother, poor thing, was a gentle lady. After she left, everything changed. How did it change? The lady sighed, looking around to make sure no one else was listening. Mr. Richard, the girl's father, remarried quickly. Less than a year later. Lorena is a beautiful woman, elegant, always very polite. But since she arrived, Clara disappeared. I don't see the girl in the garden anymore. I don't see her going to school, nothing. Maybe she's homeschooled, Miller suggested. Could be. Eleanor didn't sound convinced. But there's something else. About 3 weeks ago, I woke up in the middle of the night thirsty. I was opening the kitchen window to cool off when I heard crying. Soft, muffled. It came from that house. I found it strange, but the next morning when I mentioned it to the neighbor's maid across the street, she said she had heard it too. Said it's the girl crying at night. And no one did anything? The lady shrugged, embarrassed. You know how it is, detective. We don't want to meddle in other people's lives. Besides, Lorena always has explanations. She says the girl has emotional problems since her mother left, that she's undergoing treatment, that she needs privacy. People believe her because she speaks so well, you understand. So convincing. Miller felt a knot in his stomach. I understand. But if you're investigating something, Eleanor continued, fixing him with a penetrating gaze, perhaps you should talk to Dr. Edward. He's a doctor here in town. He treats the families in the neighborhood. I bet he's seen the girl. I appreciate the information, Mrs. Eleanor. Don't mention it. The lady smiled again, but this time there was genuine concern in her eyes. I hope it's nothing serious. But a child who disappears from the eyes of the world like that, without rhyme or reason, it worries me. Especially one who lost her mother so early. They exchanged a few more pleasantries before Eleanor went on her way. Miller stood there for a few more minutes, observing the mansion. Thor had calmed down, but still kept his eyes fixed on that small upstairs window. Come on, partner. We have work to do. Back at the precinct, Miller went straight to his computer and started researching. Richard Sterling was an import business owner with offices in New York City and Aspen, Colorado. He traveled frequently, married twice. His first wife, Marina Sterling, had passed away 3 years ago, cause not specified in public records. A year later, he married Lorena Vasconcelos, 38 years old, with a degree in business administration, no criminal record. Nothing there raised obvious red flags. But Miller knew that the worst cases were exactly like that, too clean, too perfect. He printed some information and put it in a drawer. Then he picked up the phone and called Dr. Edward Thompson's office. The secretary answered with the sweet voice typical of private practices. He identified himself and asked to speak with the doctor. It took a few minutes until the doctor's grave voice came through on the other end of the line. Detective Miller, what a surprise. How can I help you? Dr. Thompson, I need some information. Do you treat the Sterling family? There was a pause. Yes, I do. Why? It's about the girl, Clara. When was the last time you saw her? Another pause, longer this time. Look, detective, you know I can't discuss patients over the phone. Doctor-patient confidentiality. I understand, doctor, but I'm not asking for medical details. I just want to know when the last consultation was. The doctor sighed. It's been about 6 months, maybe more. The stepmother brought her for a routine checkup. And how was the girl? Silence on the other end. Then, in a lower voice, the doctor said, she had some bruises on her arm. The stepmother explained it was a fall down the stairs. I recommended more caution, but there were no signs of anything more serious. At least not that I could prove at that moment. And did you make any record of that? I made the standard report, but without a formal complaint or clear signs of anything criminal, my hands were tied, detective. You know how it works. Miller knew. He knew very well how the system failed to protect the vulnerable when there was no concrete evidence. "Thank you for the information, Doctor." "Detective?" the doctor called before he hung up. "If there's something wrong in that house, I hope you can prove it. That girl worried me from the day I saw her." "I'll do what I can." When he hung up, Miller stared at the phone for a long time. The pieces were starting to fit, but the most important one was still missing. He needed to see Clara. He needed to confirm she was okay. But how to do that, without alerting Lorena, or without a justifiable cause to enter the property? Thor, lying at his feet, raised his head and looked at him as if understanding the dilemma. The dog rested his snout on the detective's leg, a gesture of comfort and encouragement. "We'll find a way, partner, we always do." The opportunity arose in a way Miller didn't expect. On Thursday morning, he received a call from the City Hall informing him about the annual rabies vaccination campaign. As the detective responsible for municipal safety, it was his job to coordinate house-to-house visits in the more remote neighborhoods, where public services had difficulty reaching. And of course, the upscale neighborhoods were included in the route, as many residents had purebred dogs and preferred home service. It was the perfect excuse. He organized the visit for Friday afternoon, taking Thor and a city veterinarian, Dr. Paula, a competent woman with an observant eye. He didn't mention his suspicions, just asked her to pay attention to any unusual details during the visits. When they arrived at number 423, Miller felt his stomach clench. Thor was tense beside him, but obedient. The veterinarian rang the doorbell and they waited. It took almost 2 minutes for the door to open. Lorena appeared impeccable as always, wearing an elegant grey linen dress and medium-heeled shoes. Her blonde hair was tied in a loose bun, and the lavender perfume reached them even before she spoke. "Good afternoon, can I help you?" "Good afternoon, Mom. I'm Detective Miller, and this is Dr. Paula. We're conducting the rabies vaccination campaign in the neighborhood. Do you have any pets?" Lorena hesitated for a fraction of a second. "No, I don't." "I see." Miller maintained a professional tone. "Either way, we need to record all visited residences. Could you sign here confirming you don't own any animals?" He extended a clipboard with a form. Lorena looked at the paper, then at him, then at Thor. The dog watched her intently without barking, but with an intensity that made it clear he didn't like her. "Of course." She took the pen and signed quickly. "Anything else?" "Actually, yes." Miller took a step forward, forcing Lorena to retreat slightly. "We've been receiving some reports of abandoned animals in this area, dogs and cats without collars. Have you seen anything suspicious in recent days?" "No, nothing." Lorena crossed her arms, a defensive posture disguised as impatience. That's when Thor took a step towards the staircase leading upstairs. The dog stopped, focusing all his attention in that direction. A low growl began to form in his throat. "Sorry," Miller pulled the leash. "He's a bit restless today." "Perhaps it's best if—" "You wait outside then," Lorena suggested, her voice still sweet but with a hint of tension. "I wouldn't want him to be uncomfortable." That's when Dr. Paula, who had remained silent until then, spoke. "Excuse the question, but are there children in this house?" Lorena turned to her face a mask of polite confusion. "Why do you ask?" "It's just that the vaccination campaign also includes guidance on preventing accidents with animals, especially for families with young children." The veterinarian smiled professionally. "If there are minors in the house, I can leave some informative leaflets." "There is a child." "Yes, my stepdaughter," Lorena replied after a calculated pause. "But she's indisposed at the moment, a bad cold. She's resting." "I'm sorry to hear that." Miller seized the opportunity. "Perhaps it's best if we come back another day then. We don't want to bother her." "There's no need." Lorena was already closing the door. "As I said, we don't have animals." "Have a good day, Detective." The door closed before he could respond. Miller stood there for a few seconds, listening to the sound of Lorena's heels receding into the house. Thor remained focused on the door, ears pricked. "She's lying," Dr. Paula said in a low voice as they moved a few meters away. "I saw it." What did you see? When your dog looked at the stairs, I followed his gaze. There was someone at the top, a small shadow, the size of a child. It disappeared quickly, but I saw it. Miller felt his blood run cold. Are you sure? Absolutely. And another thing. The veterinarian adjusted her bag on her shoulder. That woman was nervous. Very nervous. I saw her hands shaking when she signed the form. Back at the precinct, Miller sat at his desk. Hans stared at the piece of blue fabric he had found days earlier. He picked up the phone and called a contact at social services, Beatrice Foster, an experienced social worker who had worked with him on other cases. Beatrice, I need a favor. Go ahead, Miller. Her voice was firm and reliable. He explained the situation, sticking to the facts and avoiding speculation. Beatrice listened in silence until the end. I'll check if there's any record of the girl in the school system. If she's not enrolled in public or private school, that's already a problem. School-aged children need to be studying either in person or with homeschooling documentation. Thank you, Beatrice. The sooner the better. Give me until Monday. I'll see what I can find out. Miller spent the weekend in a constant state of alert. On both nights during night patrols, he passed in front of the mansion. The downstairs lights stayed on late, but the small upstairs window always remained dark. On Saturday night, he parked a few meters away and watched for almost an hour. He saw nothing. No movement, no sign of life. Thor was with him, and the dog also watched as if expecting something to happen. But nothing happened. The mansion remained silent, guarding its secrets behind those black gates and perfect gardens. Inside the house, Clara didn't know she was being sought. She didn't know there were people starting to care, to ask questions, to suspect. She only knew she was hungry, that the cold in that room seemed to worsen every day, and that Lorena was more irritable than usual. On Sunday morning, her stepmother came up with only a glass of milk and 2 crackers. "Your father is coming back tonight," she said, her voice sharp, "and you'll stay. Here quietly, as always. If I hear a peep, a whimper, any noise at all, you'll regret it, understand?" Clara nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. "Excellent." Lorena placed the glass on the floor forcefully, spilling some milk. "And clean that up. I don't want a mess." The door closed again. Clara waited a few minutes before moving. She approached the spilled glass and, with the hem of her dirty pajamas, wiped the liquid from the wooden floor. Then she drank what was left in tiny sips, savoring every drop as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Her thoughts wandered to her mother. She tried to remember her face, her voice, her scent, but the memories were increasingly blurred, like old photographs left in the sun. Sometimes she wondered if her mother had really existed, or if it was just a dream she had invented to endure reality. She looked at the doll with the missing arm, the only toy she had left from her previous life. She hugged it tightly, feeling tears burn in her eyes. But she didn't cry. She had learned that crying was useless. It only made everything worse. Downstairs, she could hear muffled sounds. Lorena talking on the phone. Her fake, cheerful voice probably talking to a club friend. Then the sound of the television, a cooking show by the sound of it. Clara imagined the colorful dishes on the screen, the steaming food, the smiling chefs. Her stomach rumbled again. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep. It was the only way to make time pass faster, to sleep and dream of a different place, a different time, a different life. On Monday morning, Beatrice called Miller as soon as he arrived at the precinct. "I found something," she said, her voice tense. "Clara Sterling is not enrolled in any school in the city, neither public nor private. There's also no record of approved homeschooling. She has been officially out of the educational system for 2 years. 2 years, Miller repeated, feeling anger rise in his chest. And there's more. I contacted Child Protective Services. There's no record of visits or follow-up for this child. It's as if she doesn't exist for the state." "This changes everything, Beatrice. Now we have a legal basis for an official visit." "Exactly. I'll prepare the documentation. We can go to the house today with a social visit order. They can't stop us." "Then let's go." Miller looked at Thor, who raised his head, as if he knew something was about to happen. Today. Monday afternoon was overcast when Miller, Beatrice and Thor arrived at the gate of the Sterling mansion. This time it wasn't an informal visit. Beatrice carried a folder with all the necessary documentation, including the social visit order issued by Child Protective Services. It was standard procedure when a school-aged child was not listed in any educational record. Miller rang the doorbell, and they waited. It took longer than last time for Lorena to appear. When the door opened, he immediately noticed the change. She didn't have her usual serene air. Her hair was slightly disheveled, as if she had just woken from a nap, although it was 3 in the afternoon. She wore a silk robe over casual clothes, something that contrasted with the impeccable image she always projected. "Detective Miller." Her voice was colder this time. "2 visits in less than a week. To what do I owe the honor?" "Mrs. Sterling, this is Beatrice Foster, a social worker for the city." He indicated the woman beside him. "We are here on an official visit related to your stepdaughter, Clara." Lorena narrowed her eyes but maintained her composure. "Official visit? For what reason?" Beatrice stepped forward, her voice firm but polite. "We've identified that Clara is not enrolled in any educational institution, nor does she have an approved homeschooling record. As you know, it is mandatory for children between 6 and 14 years old to be properly enrolled. We need to verify the situation." "Clara is being homeschooled," Lorena replied quickly. "We just haven't finalized the bureaucratic paperwork yet. My husband handles these things, and he travels a lot." "I understand." Beatrice maintained a professional tone. "Still, we need to see the child and assess her living conditions. It's standard procedure." Lorena hesitated. Her eyes moved from Beatrice to Miller, then to Thor. The dog watched her with his characteristic intensity, showing no aggression but no friendliness either. "She's sleeping," Lorena finally said. "She had a rough night. Cough, fever. I wouldn't want to wake her." "No problem. We can wait for her to wake up," Miller replied, already taking a step towards the entrance. "Or we can just take a quick look to confirm she's okay. We won't disturb her." The tension on Lorena's face was visible now. She knew she had no legal choice but to let them in, but every fiber of her being wanted to close that door and send them away. Finally, she stepped aside. "Very well. But please, be quick and quiet." The interior of the mansion was as impeccable as expected. Gleaming marble floors, noble wooden furniture, paintings in gilded frames on the walls. Everything smelled of cleanliness and money. But there was something artificial about the environment, like a set built to impress visitors, not a home where people actually lived. Thor entered with Miller and immediately headed for the staircase. The dog didn't hesitate, began climbing the steps with determination. Miller followed him, with Beatrice close behind. Lorena came last, her heels clicking on the marble with a sound that echoed through the empty house. "Where is her room?" Miller asked. "Upstairs, 3rd door on the right," Lorena replied, her voice tense. But Thor didn't go to the 3rd door on the right. Instead, he stopped in front of a smaller door at the end of the corridor, almost hidden between 2 decorative columns. It was a different door from the others, narrower, with peeling paint on the edges. It looked like the entrance to a storage room or attic. "I thought you said the 3rd door on the right," Miller observed. "Yes, that's her room, the main room." Lorena hurried to catch up with them. "This door here is just an old storage room. We keep unused things." Thor scratched the door and let out a low whimper. Miller knew that sound. It was the sound the dog made when he found someone during a search operation, someone alive needing help. "I'll need you to open this door," Miller said, his voice making it clear it wasn't a request. "There's nothing there, just old junk, boxes, broken furniture." "Then there's no problem in opening it." Beatrice crossed her arms, positioning herself beside the detective. Lorena realized she was cornered. With slow, almost reluctant movements, she took a bunch of keys from her robe pocket. She chose a specific one, small and rusty, and inserted it into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading to an upper floor. "An attic," Miller concluded. "As I said, just a storage room." But Thor was already climbing the stairs. Miller followed him, turning on his phone's flashlight to light the way. The steps were steep, and the wood groaned under their feet. The air there was colder, damp, smelling of mold and something else, something that made his stomach churn, the smell of abandonment, of suffering. At the top of the stairs, there was another door. This one was not locked. Thor pushed it open with his snout and entered. Miller followed, and what he saw made him stop in his tracks, his breath caught in his throat. It was a tiny room, more like a cell. The walls were stained with dampness, the wooden floor had loose planks, and the only window was too high for a child to reach. There was a thin mattress in the corner, covered by a torn blanket. Beside it, an old doll with a missing arm. And in the center of the room, curled up like a frightened animal, was Clara. The girl had a thin face, deep dark circles under her eyes, and arms as thin as twigs. She wore dirty, stained pajamas, several sizes too small. Her hair was tangled, too long and unkempt. When she saw Miller, she curled up even further, trembling. "My God," Beatrice whispered behind him, her voice choked. Miller knelt down slowly, trying to appear as unthreatening as possible. "Hi, Clara. My name is Miller. I won't hurt you. I'm here to help." The girl didn't answer. She just looked at him with those hollow eyes, filled with a fear no child should ever know. Thor approached slowly, lying down on the floor near her. The dog knew exactly how to act, how to make himself small and harmless so as not to scare her. "This is Thor," Miller continued, keeping his voice soft. "He's very good. He likes children." Clara looked at the dog. For a moment, something changed in her eyes, a spark of curiosity, perhaps even hope. She slowly extended her hand and touched Thor's head. The dog remained still, letting himself be petted. Beatrice entered the room and quickly assessed the environment. There were no toys, no books, nothing to indicate that a child lived there, just that miserable mattress, the broken doll, and a tray in the corner with old food remains. "Clara," the social worker also knelt down. "When was the last time you ate?" The girl looked at her, then at the tray, but didn't answer. That's when they heard footsteps on the stairs. Lorena appeared at the door, her face a mask of contained fury. "Are you satisfied? You've invaded my home, scared the girl." "Scared her?" Miller stood up, struggling to control his own anger. "Mrs. Sterling, this child is being kept in inhumane conditions, without adequate food, without hygiene, without basic care." "That's absurd," Lorena raised her voice. "Clara has severe behavioral problems. She refuses to eat, she refuses to obey. I try to help her, but she's difficult. Anyone who has dealt with traumatized children would understand." "Traumatized by whom?" Beatrice also stood up, positioning herself between Lorena and Clara. "This child is clearly neglected. Look at her. She's malnourished, frightened, living in an attic as if she were an animal." "You don't understand." Lorena tried to change her tone, trying to sound more reasonable. "Clara has had many problems since her mother left. I do the best I can, but sometimes she needs some alone time to calm down. It's a technique I learned from a psychologist." "What psychologist?" Miller crossed his arms. "I want his name, now." Lorena opened. Her mouth closed it, opened it again. I don't remember the name at the moment. My husband hired him." "Where is your husband?" "Traveling. He'll be back tomorrow." "Then he'll have a lot to explain." Miller turned to Beatrice. "We need to take the girl now." "I agree." Beatrice was already taking her phone out of her pocket. "I'll call Child Protective Services and an ambulance. This child needs immediate medical attention." "You can't do that." Lorena took a step forward, but Miller blocked her path. "She's my stepdaughter. I have rights." "The child's rights come first, ma'am, and from what I'm seeing here, those rights have been systematically violated." He kept his voice firm, professional, but inside emotions he hadn't felt in a long time were boiling. As a police officer, he had seen many bad things, but something about seeing a child in that state, in that cold, abandoned room, hit him differently. Clara remained on the floor, clinging to Thor, as if the dog were the only solid thing in a world crumbling around her, and perhaps he was. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, followed by a Child Protective Services vehicle. Clara was examined by paramedics still in the attic room. because she refused to let go of Thor and panicked every time someone tried to move her away from the dog. Miller had to negotiate with the healthcare professionals for Thor to accompany her during the transfer to the hospital. The paramedics confirmed what was already obvious to the naked eye. Clara was severely malnourished, dehydrated, and showed multiple bruises in different stages of healing. One of them, on her left arm, seemed particularly old, probably from the incident Dr. Edward had reported months earlier, but there were others, more recent, on her back and legs. Lorena tried to prevent the child's removal, arguing that she had rights as a legal guardian. That's when Beatrice presented the emergency protective order she had obtained by phone from the juvenile court judge. Clara was, officially, in temporary state custody until the situation was clarified. "You'll pay for this," Lorena spat the words as Clara was carried downstairs. "My husband has lawyers, good lawyers. They'll destroy all of you for trespassing and defamation." "I look forward to speaking with your husband," Miller replied calmly, "and with those lawyers too. I'm sure they'll want to explain how an 8-year-old child ended up living in an attic without adequate food under your supervision." Clara didn't say a word during the entire trip to the hospital. She remained curled up on the stretcher, one hand holding the doll with the missing arm, the other stroking Thor, whom Miller had obtained special authorization to bring in the ambulance. The dog lay beside the girl, calm and protective, as if understanding the gravity of the situation. At the municipal hospital, Clara was taken to a pediatric emergency room. The attending physician, Dr. Sarah Green, was an experienced professional who had dealt with difficult cases before, but even she seemed shocked to see the child's condition. "How long do you think she was in those conditions?" Beatrice asked as they waited outside. Dr. Sarah Green shook her head. "Based on the malnutrition and the state of the bruises, I'd say months, maybe over a year. It's amazing she survived. Children are resilient, but there's a limit." "Will she be okay?" Miller asked. "Physically, yes. With adequate nutrition, hydration, and medical care, her body will recover." The doctor paused, her gaze distant. "But emotionally, psychologically, this will leave deep scars. She will need specialized support for a long time." "We will provide everything necessary," Beatrice assured. "I've already contacted a child psychologist who works with neglect cases. She'll be here tomorrow." "And what about the father?" The doctor looked at Miller. "Where was he during all this?" "That's exactly what I'm going to find out." Richard Sterling arrived in Aspen, Colorado on Tuesday morning. Miller was waiting for him at the precinct, having already summoned the businessman for a statement. Richard was a distinguished-looking man, 45 years old, grey hair slicked back, expensive suit, and a watch that cost more than a detective's annual salary. He entered the interrogation room with the confidence of someone accustomed to being in control. But when Miller began to explain the situation, that confidence began to crack. "This is absurd," Richard said, but his voice lacked the expected firmness. "Clara was fine. Lorena took care of her. I always asked, and Lorena always said everything was under control. Mr. Sterling, when was the last time you truly saw your daughter?" Silence. Richard looked at his hands, then at the wall, anywhere but Miller's eyes. "I travel a lot. My business requires me to be away frequently. But I knew Clara was in good hands." "In good hands," Miller repeated, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Your daughter was living in an attic, Mr. Sterling, locked up, malnourished, with bruises all over her body. And you want to tell me you knew nothing?" "Lorena told me Clara had behavioral problems, that she needed discipline. I trusted her." Richard ran a hand over his face. "My wife was always very dedicated. She had experience with difficult children." "What experience?" "She worked as a teacher before we got married. She always knew how to deal well with young people." Miller opened a folder on the table and pushed some papers towards Richard. "Interesting, because I found out something about your wife's past. Lorena Vasconcelos was, in fact, a teacher, but she lost her license 6 years ago after allegations of emotional abuse against students. Nothing was proven at the time, but she was forced to resign. Did you know about this?" The color drained from Richard's face. "No, she never mentioned it. Perhaps because she didn't want you to know." Miller leaned forward. Let me be clear, Mr. Sterling. Your wife severely neglected your daughter. There may have been physical abuse. 2, we are investigating. And you, as a father and legal guardian, had a duty to protect that child. Parental neglect is a crime. I didn't know, Richard repeated. But now there was desperation in his voice. I swear I didn't know. If I had known Clara was in those conditions, I would have done something. I loved my first wife. I loved my daughter. Then why did you never ask why she wasn't in school? Why did you never question why Clara never appeared when there were visitors? Why did you accept all of Lorena's excuses without checking? Richard had no answer. He just lowered his head. His shoulders slumped under the weight of the guilt that finally reached him. Where is Lorena now? He asked after a long silence. At home, under surveillance. She will be formally charged with neglect and abuse. Depending on what the investigation reveals, there may be additional charges. And Clara? She's at the hospital recovering. Afterwards, she'll be placed with a temporary foster family until we decide what to do. I want to see her, Richard said, raising his eyes. Please let me see my daughter. Miller studied him for a long moment. I'll ask her psychologist if she thinks it's appropriate. But frankly, Mr. Sterling, I don't know if Clara will want to see you. The words hit Richard like a physical slap. He knew he deserved it. He knew he had failed in the worst possible way a father could fail. He had been so engrossed in his business, his travels, his new life with Lorena, that he had abandoned the only thing that truly mattered: his daughter. That afternoon, Miller went to the hospital to visit Clara. The girl was in a private room, clean, wearing clean hospital pajamas with an IV in her arm for hydration and nutrients. Thor was lying on a cushion on the floor beside the bed. The doctors had made an exception to the rules, allowing the dog to stay there, recognizing that his presence was therapeutic for the child. Clara was awake, but didn't speak. She just looked out the window, watching the clouds pass across the sky. When Miller entered, she turned her head slightly, recognizing him. Hi, Clara. He pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. How are you feeling? She didn't answer, but she also didn't recoil as she had before. That was progress. I want you to know you're safe now, Miller continued, keeping his voice gentle. No one will hurt you anymore. No one will lock you up again. You'll have food, you'll have a warm place to sleep. You'll be able to play and go to school like all the other children. Clara looked at him with those deep eyes. For the first time, her voice came out, weak and hoarse from disuse. And the doll? Miller looked at the doll with the missing arm that was on the bedside table. She'll stay with you. She's yours. A tear rolled down the girl's face. Just one, but it was the first real emotion she had shown since they found her. Mommy gave it to me, she whispered, before she left. Miller felt a tightening in his chest. I know. And she would be happy to know you're safe now. Thor raised his head and rested his snout on the bed near Clara's hand. She stroked him, and for the first time in a long time, something akin to peace passed over her face. Outside the room, Beatrice watched through the glass window, discreetly wiping her own. Tears. Dr. Sarah Green was beside her. She'll need a lot of time, the doctor said, but children are surprisingly strong. If we give her the right support, the right structure, she can recover. Not completely, perhaps, but enough to have a good life. I'll make sure she has all of that, Beatrice promised, everything. 6 months had passed since that cold afternoon when Clara was found. Spring had arrived in Aspen, Colorado, bringing colorful flowers and longer days. The town continued to be the charming refuge of the East Coast elite, but now it carried a story that would be remembered for a long time. The story of how a police dog and an attentive detective saved a child the world had forgotten. Lorena Vasconcelos was formally charged with severe neglect, abuse, and unlawful confinement of a minor. During the trial, which attracted attention from the entire region, it was discovered that she had developed a pattern of abusive behavior over the years. Investigations revealed that, during her time as a teacher, there were at least 4 documented cases of cruel treatment toward students. Parents had complained, but their voices were ignored by the system. Now, finally, she would face the consequences. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 4 years. Richard Sterling was not criminally charged, but lost custody of Clara. The judge ruled that, although he was not directly responsible for the abuses, his neglect and omission as a father made him unfit to care for the child. He accepted the decision without contesting, recognizing that he had failed unforgivably. He sold the mansion and moved to New York City, visiting Clara twice a month under supervision, slowly trying to rebuild a relationship that might never be fully repaired. Clara was taken in by Marina and Paul Jenkins, a retired teaching couple who lived in a cozy house on the outskirts of Aspen, Colorado. Marina had white hair, always tied in a braid, and a smile that reached her eyes. Paul was a patient man with a calm voice who loved gardening and telling stories. They had fostered other children over the years and had experience with delicate cases. In the beginning, Clara barely spoke. She spent hours sitting in the garden, watching the flowers, clutching her doll with the missing arm. Marina didn't pressure her, she simply sat beside her, knitting or reading, offering silent companionship. Paul planted roses and invited Clara to help, teaching her about seeds, soil, and patience. Slowly, very slowly, Clara began to open up. First came isolated words. "Thank you." "Good morning." "Yes." "No." Then short sentences. "Can I help?" "It's tasty." "I like this flower." And finally, conversations. About the day, about the books Marina read to her, about the recipes they made together in the kitchen. The psychologist, Dr. Helen Carter, visited Clara 3 times a week. The sessions were careful, respectful, never forcing memories the girl wasn't ready to revisit. They worked with drawings, games, stories. Slowly, Clara began to process the trauma, to understand that what had happened to her was not her fault, that she deserved love and care. Thor continued to be a constant presence in her life. Miller brought the dog to visit her every week, and these were the moments when Clara was most animated. Her eyes sparkled when she saw the German shepherd, and she ran to hug him, burying her face in his soft fur. Thor was patient and gentle, allowing himself to be hugged, petted, even pulled by the ears when Clara forgot her own strength. He never complained, just remained there, a pillar of security in a world she was still learning to trust. The most surprising revelation came on an October afternoon during a routine visit from Detective Miller. He was in the garden with Clara, watching her play with Thor, when Marina approached with a serious expression. "Miller, I need to tell you something Clara revealed to me yesterday." He immediately became alert. "Something bad?" Marina shook her head. "Not bad, but important." She finally talked about the day of the accident on the stairs. Accident. The word. Everyone used to describe the moment Clara was found fallen in the mansion's foyer, the moment that finally brought the truth to light. "It wasn't an accident," Marina said in a low voice. "Clara told me Lorena had deliberately put body oil on the steps. She heard her stepmother telling someone on the phone that she was going to find a way to get rid of her, that she had already gotten rid of her mother, and that the daughter would be the next problem solved." Miller felt his blood run cold. "So her mother—" Marina nodded gravely. "Clara isn't sure, but she thinks her mother didn't die of natural causes. She remembers hearing an argument between her father and Lorena, weeks before Lorena officially entered the family. The timeline doesn't match, Miller. Lorena was already in their lives before Richard admitted. This changes everything." Miller immediately took out his phone. "I'll need Clara to officially discuss this with the psychologist, and I'm reopening the investigation into Richard's first wife." "I understand, but please be gentle with her. Talking about this was extremely difficult." "I will be." The following weeks were intense. With Clara's testimony and a new forensic investigation, it was discovered that Marina Sterling, Richard's first wife, had not died of natural causes as the death certificate suggested. There were indications of poisoning by substances that mimicked symptoms of heart failure. The doctor who signed the certificate at the time had been negligent, not requesting a more detailed autopsy. Lorena and Richard already knew each other before the first wife passed away. Old phone records and emails confirmed a relationship that had been going on for months prior. Richard claimed to know nothing about any action against Marina, but it became clear that Lorena had orchestrated everything. She, wanted the comfortable life Richard offered, and was willing to eliminate any obstacle. First the wife, then, slowly, the daughter who represented a constant reminder of Richard's love for Marina. New charges were filed against Lorena, this time much more serious. The investigation was still ongoing, but the prosecutor was confident that he could prove her responsibility in the situation of the first wife. Lorena would face decades in prison. Richard, in turn, fell into a deep depression upon discovering the truth. He had been manipulated, blinded by a woman who saw him only as an opportunity, and worse, his blindness had cost the life of the woman he loved, and almost cost the life of his daughter. During one of the supervised visits, he tried to ask Clara for forgiveness. They sat in a neutral room, with Marina present as emotional support for the girl. "Clara," Richard began, his voice choked, "I know there are no words that can fix what happened. I failed you in every possible way. I didn't protect you. I didn't see what was happening under my own roof. I didn't hear your pleas for help." Clara looked at him with those eyes that had seen too much for a child her age. "You didn't want to see," she said, her voice firm but without anger. "It was easier to believe her than to look at me." The words cut Richard more deeply than any judicial sentence could. "You're right, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it, even knowing it will never be enough." "You don't need to compensate," Clara replied after a long silence. "You just need to be honest, with me and with yourself." It was an impressively mature moment for an 8-year-old child, but Clara was no longer an ordinary child. She had been forced to mature too quickly, to understand emotional complexities that most people only grasp in adulthood. Over time, father and daughter began to build a new relationship. It wouldn't be like before, never would be. But there was room for something new, something based on honesty and real effort. A year after being found, Clara began to attend regular school. At first it was difficult. She was academically behind and had difficulty socializing with other children. But Marina and Paul worked with her every night, helping with lessons, and slowly she began to make friends. Children who accepted her, who didn't know about her past, who only saw in her a kind girl who liked to draw and always had an interesting story to tell. Thor continued to visit, now not just as therapy, but as a dear friend. Clara loved taking him for walks in the park, playing fetch, teaching him tricks that Miller helped her develop. The dog had aged a bit, some white hairs appearing on his snout, but he still had the same energy and the same protective instinct. On a sunny summer afternoon almost 2 years after the rescue, Miller visited Clara with a special proposal. "I have a surprise for you," he said, kneeling to be at her eye level. "What is it?" "Thor is going to retire from police service soon. He's done a lot, helped many people. Now he deserves a peaceful home where he can rest." Clara looked at the dog who was lying in the shade of a tree in the garden. "He really does. And I was thinking," Miller continued, smiling, "that maybe he could come live with you. If Marina and Paul agree, of course, and if you want, and if you, too." Clara's eyes widened. "Really? Really? I think you two make a good team." Clara couldn't hold back the tears, but this time they were tears of joy. She ran to Thor and hugged him tightly. "Did you hear that? You're going to live with me." The dog licked her face, his tail wagging vigorously. It was as if he knew exactly what was happening and was as happy as she was. Marina and Paul agreed immediately. Thor moved into the house a week later, and for the first time since everything had begun, Clara felt she had a real family. Not perfect, not without scars, but real and full of love. The story of Clara and Thor spread throughout Aspen, Colorado, and beyond. Local newspapers covered the case, always respecting the child's privacy, but highlighting the importance of being attentive to signs of abuse and neglect. Several other families came forward to Child Protective Services with concerns about children they hadn't seen in a long time, neighbors who seemed isolated. Some of these concerns were unfounded, but others led to important interventions. The case also resulted in changes to local protocol. Now every school-age child not enrolled was automatically visited by social workers. Doctors and teachers received additional training to identify signs of abuse. And the community as a whole became more vigilant, understanding that sometimes, behind iron gates and perfect gardens, the darkest stories can hide. Clara continued her healing journey. Some days were difficult. Nightmares still visited her occasionally, and certain smells or situations brought back memories she preferred to forget. But she had support. She had people who cared. She had Thor by her side every night, lying at the foot of her bed, silent guardian of her dreams. On a Sunday afternoon, 3 years after, being rescued, Clara was in the garden helping Paul plant tulips when she stopped and looked at the cozy house, at Marina knitting on the porch, at Thor dozing in the sun. A genuine smile, perhaps the first truly free of shadows, appeared on her face. "It's beautiful here," she said to Paul. "It is," he agreed, gently squeezing her shoulder. "And it will get even more beautiful. Gardens take time to bloom, but when they do, they're worth all the wait." Clara understood that he wasn't just talking about the flowers. 5 years had passed since Clara found her new life with Marina and Paul. The 8-year-old girl rescued from that cold, dark attic was now a 13-year-old teenager, with eyes that still carried deep memories, but also shone with a light that seemed impossible in those early days. The Saturday morning in Aspen, Colorado, was particularly beautiful. The autumn sun filtered through the firs, creating golden patterns in the Jenkins garden. Clara sat on the wooden bench Paul had built especially for her, a sketchbook on her lap and colored pencils scattered around her. Thor, now with almost completely white fur on his snout and slower movements, lay at her feet, enjoying the warmth of the sun. She drew a scene from the garden, the roses that had bloomed that spring, the butterflies dancing among the flowers. The drawing was detailed, full of life and color. Very different from the first drawings she had made with Dr. Helen years ago, when she could only use black and gray, creating images of empty rooms and locked doors. "Clara, dear," Marina called from the porch, holding a tray. "I brought you a snack and milk for Thor." The girl smiled, closing the sketchbook carefully. "Thank you, Marina." The lady approached, placing the tray on a small garden table. There were sandwiches, fresh fruit and orange juice, abundant, colorful food offered with love. Clara still remembered the first months at the Jenkins house, when she had difficulty believing that food would always be available, that she didn't need to save crumbs or eat too quickly, for fear of it being taken away. "Your drawings are getting more and more beautiful," Marina commented, sitting beside her. "Your art teacher must be impressed." "She said I have talent," Clara replied, a slight blush on her cheeks. "She suggested I participate in the school art exhibition next month." "And will you participate?" Clara hesitated, biting her lip. "I don't know. A lot of people will see." Marina gently placed her hand over hers. "I understand it's still difficult to expose yourself, but your drawings are beautiful, Clara. And sharing your art can be a way to show the world how much you've grown, how strong you are." The girl looked at the sketchbook, thoughtful. "I'll think about it. No rush. The decision is yours always." This was one of the things Clara loved most about Marina and Paul. They never forced her, never pressured her. They always respected her limits, even when gently encouraging her to expand her boundaries. Thor raised his head, his ears perking up. A moment later, Clara heard it too, the sound of a car arriving. She recognized the engine immediately. It was her father's car. Richard visited once a month now, always on Saturday mornings. The visits were no longer supervised, but Clara still preferred them to happen at the Jenkins house, on neutral territory where she felt safe. The relationship between father and daughter had improved considerably over the years, but it was still delicate, built on a foundation that had been broken and was being carefully rebuilt. The car stopped in front of the gate. Richard got out, thinner than Clara remembered from when she was little, with more grey hair. He carried a box wrapped in colorful paper. "Good morning," he greeted, opening the gate. "Marina, Paul, Clara, and Thor, of course." The dog slowly got up and went to Richard, sniffing his hand. Over the years, Thor had learned to tolerate Clara's father, although he never showed him the same affection he had for the girl. "Good morning, Richard," Marina replied politely. "Would you like some coffee?" "I'd love some, thank you." They moved to the porch where Paul was already preparing the table with cups and homemade cake. Clara sat in her favorite chair, with Thor lying at her feet. Richard sat on the other side of the table, maintaining a respectful distance. "How are your studies going?" he asked, his tone genuinely interested. "Well, I got a perfect score on the history test." "That's wonderful." Richard smiled, and there was real pride in his eyes. "I always knew you were smart." There was a time when Clara would have received that compliment, with bitterness, thinking of all the years her intelligence went unrecognized, when she was locked up and forgotten. But therapy with Dr. Helen had helped her process those emotions, to understand that holding on to anger only hurt her. "I brought something for you," Richard said, pushing the wrapped box across the table. "I hope you like it." Clara opened the present carefully. Inside was a professional set of colored pencils with 72 different colors and a high-quality sketchbook with special art paper. "I remembered you mentioned you liked to draw," Richard explained, a little nervous. "The saleswoman at the art store said these are the best." "They're beautiful," Clara said, running her fingers over the pencil boxes. "Thank you, Dad." The word Dad still didn't come easily, but it came. It was progress. They talked for another hour. Richard spoke about work, about how he had reduced his travels to spend more time in New York City, about the new apartment he had bought, smaller and cozier than the old mansion. Clara talked about school, about the friends she had made, about the science project she was developing. Marina and Paul watched discreetly, ready to intervene if necessary, but satisfied to see that the conversation flowed naturally. It wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was real and honest. Before leaving, Richard hesitated at the door. "Clara, there's something I need to tell you." The girl felt a tightening in her stomach. Important news always made her nervous. "What is it?" "Lorena was definitively convicted last week. All appeals were denied." He took a deep breath. "She will spend the rest of her life in prison, 25 years without possibility of parole." Clara said nothing for a long moment. She processed the information, observed how she felt. She expected to feel joy, satisfaction, perhaps even anger. But what she felt was emptiness. Not a bad emptiness, but the absence of something that had haunted her for years. "Okay," she finally said. "Thank you for telling me. How are you feeling?" "I don't know yet. I'll talk to Dr. Helen about it." Richard nodded, understanding. "That's very mature of you. And Clara?" He placed his hand on her shoulder, a light, permitted touch. "I want you to know I'm here. Whenever you need to talk, whenever you need anything, I'm here." "I know." After he left, Clara returned to the garden. She sat on the bench, Thor immediately coming to rest his head on her lap. She stroked the dog, feeling the familiar texture of his fur, the comforting warmth of his presence. "How are you, dear?" Paul approached, sitting beside her. "Confused," Clara admitted. "I thought I'd feel better knowing she's imprisoned forever, but I just feel tired." "Tired of what?" "Of carrying all this. Of being the girl who was abused, the girl who was rescued, the girl who survived. Sometimes I just want to be Clara, just Clara." Paul put his arm around her shoulders. "You are just Clara, dear. Everything that happened is part of your story, but it doesn't define who you are. You define who you are." "How?" "By the choices you make every day, by the kindness you show to friends, by the courage to keep trying, even when it's difficult, by the talent you develop, by the person you are becoming." Clara rested her head on his shoulder. "And who am I becoming?" "An incredible young woman, strong, talented, compassionate, someone who will do wonderful things in this world." That night Clara had a dream. It wasn't a nightmare like those that tormented her in the first years. It was a peaceful dream. She was in an immense garden full of flowers of all colors. Thor was there, young again, running among the plants. And there was another person, a woman with brown hair and a gentle smile. Clara knew, without knowing how, that it was her mother. "You're okay, daughter," the woman said, her voice like a distant melody. "I'm so proud of you." "I miss you," Clara replied in the dream. "I know, but you're not alone. You never were. Look around you." Clara looked and saw Marina and Paul, Dr. Helen, Miller, Beatrice, even her father, all in a circle around her. People who cared, people who had helped her survive and flourish. When she woke up, there were tears on her face. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of acceptance. For the first time in a long time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she could let go of some of the weight she carried. On Monday, Clara sought out her art teacher at school. "I decided to participate in the exhibition," she said, her voice firm despite her nerves. "I want to show my drawings." The teacher, Mrs. Davies, smiled broadly. "I'm so happy to hear that, Clara. What drawings do you want to exhibit?" Clara thought for a moment. "I have a series. They're about transformation, about how things can change, even when they seem impossible." "Sounds perfect. I can't wait to see them." In the following weeks, Clara worked intensely on her series of drawings. There were 6 in total, each representing a phase of her journey. The first showed a dark, empty room. The second, a window with a ray of light entering. The third, a door opening. The fourth, a garden seen from afar. The fifth, flowers beginning to bloom. And the sixth, a complete, vibrant garden full of life, with a girl and a dog sitting together under the sun. She didn't include obvious details of her story. She didn't want people to see her only as a victim, but anyone who looked closely could see the journey, the transformation, the hope. The exhibition night arrived. The school gym was decorated with works by dozens of students, paintings, sculptures, photographs, installations. Parents, teachers, and students circulated, admiring the young talent. Clara was nervous, her hands trembling slightly. Marina and Paul were by her side, offering silent support. To her surprise, Richard had also come, keeping a respectful distance but present. Her drawings were displayed on a special wall, perfectly lit. Clara watched as people stopped to look, saw their expressions change as they followed the sequence of images. An older woman, whom Clara didn't know, stood in front of the drawings for a long time. She had tears in her eyes when she finally turned. "Did you do this?" she asked Clara. "Yes, Mum. It's beautiful. So powerful." The woman wiped her eyes. "My granddaughter went through something difficult recently. I think these drawings will help her understand that there can be hope on the other side." Clara felt something expand in her chest. For the first time, she realized that her story, her art, her journey, could mean something to other people. They could help, inspire, give hope. "I hope she gets well," Clara said sincerely. "Me too, and thank you for sharing this." Throughout the night, more people stopped to admire her drawings. Some just looked in silence. Others asked questions about the technique, the colors, the inspiration. Clara answered what she could, keeping the personal details to herself, but sharing the universal message of transformation and hope. At the end of the night, when they were driving home, Paul driving and Marina in the passenger seat, Clara looked out the window at the lights of Aspen, Colorado. The town that had been the scene of so much suffering was now her home, a place of healing and new beginnings. "Thank you," she said suddenly. Marina turned. "For what, dear?" "For everything. For taking me in. For being patient. For loving me when I didn't even know how to love myself." Marina reached back, and Clara took her hand. "No need to thank us, dear. You've brought so much joy into our lives. We are the ones who thank you." When they arrived home, Thor was waiting for them at the door, his tail wagging slowly. Clara knelt and hugged him, burying her face in his fur. "We made it," she whispered to the dog. "We're okay." Thor licked her face, as he always did, and Clara laughed, a genuine, free laugh, full of life. That night, before going to sleep, Clara opened a new sketchbook, the one Richard had given her as a gift. On the first page, she wrote, "My story doesn't begin in the attic. It doesn't end with the rescue. My story is about every day I choose to continue, every moment I choose to grow, every time I choose to believe that tomorrow can be better than yesterday. This is my story, and it's still being written. She closed the sketchbook and placed it on the bedside table. Thor was already lying at the foot of the bed, a faithful guardian as always. Clara turned off the light and lay down, feeling for the first time in a long time completely at peace. Outside, Aspen, Colorado slept under a starry sky, and inside that cozy house, a girl who had survived the unthinkable dreamed of the future, a future she herself was building, one day at a time, with love, courage, and hope. Because Clara had learned the most important lesson of all: no matter how dark the room, there is always a door. And on the other side of that door, there is light, there is life, there is possibility. You just need to have the courage to open it and walk through. And she had that courage, she always had. She just needed to discover it.